All right, guys. So I'm going to try to be as clear as I can with this video and as unbiased as I can. We're going to evaluate live retargeting, and I'm going to explain some misconceptions in regards to retargeting animations to try to clear the air with that for you before I start on the differences in performance between live retargeting and not. That way you have a clear picture as to what to expect. So in this example, I haven't actually changed any of the default settings on the metahumans. This pose right here was specifically retargeted and modified for this guy right here, which is the medium height, normal weight male. And as you'll see, the hands are all offset. Now that's not a realistic setting. You won't actually want these default settings, and I'll go into that a little bit, but I want to try to make this quick because this video can become pretty long pretty quick. So this pose right here is actually just a retargeted animation. It has not been modified or fixed for any of the characters. And so you'll see right away that none of the characters are holding this properly, and their fingers look all funky, every single one of them. And that's because that pose was not made for these characters. So there's a big misconception about retargeting. People think that you can just retarget animations and the hands will all just fall in place like they're supposed to. Some people are under the impression that they can use the hand IK to force the hands into position, and that will just magically fix the problem for them. That's not actually true. That will not fix the problem, and it definitely won't fix the fingers. So either way, you're going to have to modify things, just so you know. So you could use IK to try to get the gun level so that he's not pointing it up in the air like he is right now. You could use it for that purpose, but for the most part, on your characters, the stock of the rifle would probably still be inside of his body, if not like sticking out of his back. So, and that's if you're using the hand IK. So even under ideal conditions with IK retargeter settings, you're still going to have to modify those regardless of how perfect you get it for the retargeting purpose. So I wanted to point that out to you because that's a big misconception people have. So even with these default settings, you can somewhat mitigate the problem with the hands, but the aiming will still be off, and the fingers probably still won't be perfect. Now remember, I retargeted these animations, but after I retargeted them, I modified these animations in an animation software so that he would hold the rifle properly. It didn't just magically retarget like that. I had to fix it to look like that after the fact. So I want to really stress that because that's something that a lot of people are not aware of. So this right here is one method that you can use to almost get it right, and it works pretty good actually. So you'll see the hands are almost perfect on all of your characters, but you'll see that some of them are still pointing too far down and others are pointing too far up. But they're all pointing relatively straight now. So there's that at least. So moving on, I'm going to close this one out and I'm going to open up this one. And then we'll briefly discuss another setup. So basically, it's the translation retargeting settings that are actually causing those really bad offsets. Those are the default settings that the guys at Epic or Unreal Engine chose for the metahumans in this project. I'm not really sure why, but they're not ideal for precise hand placement. So on this one, you'll see that my translation retargeting settings, I chose animation for the root. I chose animation scaled for the pelvis. For everything else, it's skeleton. And with those settings, and let me disable that other thing. I'm just going to disable that. that won't affect it outside of here. But yeah, so even with that, you'll see that we're still having hand problems. So even doing it like that, now they are pointing straight. They are pointing straight, so there is that. As you can see, they're pointing straight, dead ahead, but their hands are not properly placed. And that's just anatomy, guys. Anatomy differs between your characters, and so the hands are going to end up in different locations. Hand precision doesn't just happen. It's not magic. It takes it takes you actually making it happen. So that you know. Now you can still implement this, and it'll correct the hands. And now what I'm actually doing here is I'm actually creating virtual bones pointing from the spine to the hand. The reason why I'm actually doing that in this situation is because of this setup, which I'm about to show you. It actually requires that they be on the spine. If you do them off of the hands, it causes problems for that method. And that method is basically an alternative to what I'm doing with my live retargeted setup in my project. So just so you guys know, the reason why I did live retargeting in my project was because my project is a public project, and I was trying to minimize the amount of custom animation people were going to have to do in order to get it right. So if I was not to offer that live retargeting approach, then everybody using my project would have to modify those poses and animations for their own characters. So, and they would have to retarget the entire animation system as well. And so that's the reason why I used the live retargeting approach in my project, because it made it accessible to all the people who wanted to use it. So as you can see here, after I implement that method with the virtual bones, the hands are almost perfect on the males. The only ones that are having issues are actually the short males, and they're having issues with their pinky. And so you could actually go back and modify that and rotate that pinky out just a little bit more, and that would prevent these issues where some of them have their pinkies cutting into the rifle. With the females, though, this doesn't mitigate it. You'll see that on all the females, the fingers right here are actually inside of the gun, and they're not actually holding the gun properly right here either. And that's because the females have smaller hands in general. So that's the reason why. So, sorry. So anyway, what I would recommend in that situation is you could still use this method, but you would want to retarget that pose to the female, and the females would need their own animal set. And that would allow you to fix the fingers for the females across the board, just like it fixed it for the males. Because remember, this pose that I made it for the medium height, normal weight male, and the females actually have a significantly smaller hands, and their base pose is actually different as well. So I wanted to get those problems out of the way for you guys before I started, but I'll go ahead and show you something else that you can do as well. So as far as what I'm doing with the live retargeting approach, where you can have different offsets for how they're holding the weapons and stuff per item, this is one solution you could implement in regards to that outside of live retargeting that wouldn't require an IK retargeter. Now, it won't do anything for the fingers, but it will allow you to control the offset of the hands. As you can see here, I've actually set up a way for you to do that here. And so you can see I can rotate the hand, and I can offset things. And these are local offsets, by the way, guys. That's the reason why this wouldn't cause problems, is because they're just local offsets. And so I intentionally rotated it over here and repositioned the hand just to show you how that would work. Now, if I had made these virtual bones pointing from one hand to the other hand, then this method would not work, and I'll explain to you why. So if if I had a virtual bone pointing from the right hand to the left hand, and I was using that as my left hand effector, and I was doing the 2 bone IK on the left hand and then the right hand, where the right hand is using an effector for that would be a virtual bone pointing from the left hand to the right hand, then what would happen is when I try to offset how the left hand is on the rifle, the right hand would move with it. So the only way to get around that would be to actually have the virtual bones on the spine, which is the chest, and that would make it independent of each other so that you could offset each of them individually. So that's why I did it that way for this setup. And then on the actual character blueprint, right here is an actual example. As you can see, what I'm actually doing is this offset is actually in world space, it's in mesh space, component space, if you will. And I'm converting that from component space to bone space. I'll eventually implement this into my project so that you can offset the hands in relation to the mesh, and it'll be less confusing and easier to adjust hand positioning. In fact, I'll probably have a trigger where you can flip-flop between the two. I don't know, we'll see. But anyway, I just wanted to get that out of the way because there's a lot of misconceptions in regards to that. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and show you guys what the difference is. So I went ahead and put this in an actual environment. Now this environment is actually very, very performance friendly. It was actually originally made in Unreal Engine 4, and they really optimized this landscape. So ideally, in an actual heavy landscape, the difference in performance between live retargeted characters and non-live retargeted characters in a heavy environment, heavier than this, that the difference would actually be smaller. So also, I'm looking from top down. I'm not looking from like this area right here. And if I were looking from this area, then the performance difference would probably be even smaller. So as you can see right here, I have a 17 or about an 18 millisecond draw. And right here, I only have about a 15 millisecond draw. So what I could actually do for this camera actor for testing this is I can actually copy that. And I can actually rotate this like that. And that would probably give it a more realistic okay, that was so weird. All right. Let me actually launch this outside in standalone. I don't know why this launching it in standalone has been having a delay here lately. Yesterday it wasn't delaying like this. So let me just maximize that. So right here with the full screen and a low resolution scale, because I'm not going to go through and try to make this like really high def or anything. I'm just going to leave the settings as default when running in standalone. But you'll see that the frame rate is about 86 and the hit on the game is actually about 5.4 milliseconds. 86 and 5.4, and that's with 25 live retargeted characters. And so these are all the same animation blueprint with different animations assigned to some of them. And I tested this, and the performance hit is the exact same as having just one animation blueprint where they all share the same animations. But ideally, in an actual game, you would have different animations. The performance does not differ between those two. The memory cost does. But I won't be going into the memory cost today. You can go and look at that yourself if you're interested. But the memory cost for doing it that way versus live retargeting, it will require more memory since you'll be having more unique animations. Did I? Okay. Yeah, I was wondering. I was like, well, okay, are you going to launch? So right here, I'm getting about 93 frames per second, about a 5 millisecond hit on the game. So that was 93, and I don't even remember what the other one was now. I'm starting to zone out today. I've had a long day. Let me go back and look. So 93 and 5 millisecond hit. I think the other one was like 5.4, 5.5 millisecond hit, and it was 80 something. So about 86. So that's a 4, 5, 6, 7. That's a 7 frame difference. And about a 0.2 millisecond difference on the game. So actually the draws are actually higher with live retargeted characters for some reason. Or the draw I think seems to be higher. I'm not sure that it's actually the live retargeted characters that are responsible for the draw, to be honest with you. I don't think that's what's responsible for it. So something else might actually be causing that. But I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know all the technical details, but I can show you the difference. So we'll go ahead and investigate 50. Now the 50, that's the worst case scenario. For some reason, around 50 characters, that's where the performance differs the most. At 125, the performance is closer to it. The difference is less as far as performance. And that's just because other things end up becoming the bottleneck and not the anim graphs themselves. So under ideal conditions, you might, your game thread might actually end up waiting on your live retargeted stuff to be returned from the worker threads. And that could be a bottleneck under certain circumstances if your game is CPU heavy. But in my experience, because everybody wants a hyper realistic game and their graphics are so out there, what ends up happening is their bottleneck ends up being the draw or the GPU. And so the game thread ends up being free. It ends up being the lower of the two. So I think for most games, for most indie games, this probably isn't, this is probably not going to be their main concern. So right here with with 50 characters in the scene, and this is about the size of somebody's yard. Also, I'm not using LOD stuff, so I'm not under normal circumstances. What you would do is after they get so far away, you would actually like have them skip so many frames. You would reduce, certain things, maybe disable IK. Foot IK, stuff like that, and that would all save you a lot of performance. Also, a lot of people, what they do is they end up bringing a bunch of characters into the scene to stress test it. stress test it. But what ends up happening is they end up thinking that it's the animation system that's heavy, but it's actually their characters, because their characters have like 50 material slots, or they have 8 material slots, but their materials are real heavy. And so they're generating like 50 draw calls per character, and you have like 50 in there. So you have like, like 800 draw calls being added to your draws over here, and that adds up and ends up being the actual bottleneck and not the animation system. So right here, you'll see that I'm getting about 11 millisecond hit, 76 frames per second. So 76, and this is 90. So that was actually higher than last time. Maybe it's because of the angle that I'm at with the landscape, but yeah, that's actually a 14 frame difference. That's worst case scenario. I think it's because I changed the camera angle. For some reason, that seems to have something to do with the difference. But I'm not really sure why that would be the case, because they're both in the same location on the map. But anyway, so yeah, so 14 frames per second difference. That's a pretty significant hit, actually. We'll go ahead and test the 100 characters. That way you can see that. Yeah, and I think the millisecond over there was like 10 point something. So I think the difference in milliseconds was probably, it could have been around 1 millisecond. I'd have to go back and look, but it was probably around 1 millisecond difference, maybe 1.5. From my previous testing, in some situations, it was as high as 2 milliseconds difference. Okay, is this going to load? Did I press the button? They need to give me some kind of indicator if it's loading or not. I was pretty sure I pressed the button. I'm going to press it again. Hopefully it doesn't open twice. Okay, I was fixing to say, dude, I was like, I know I pressed it that time. All right, so with 100 characters in the scene, we'll just give it a second. All right, so with 100 characters in the scene, we're getting about 57 frames per second. And the game thread is hitting at about 17.4. And that's definitely the bottleneck in this case, as you can clearly see. But our draw calls have obviously increased as well. It's up to 2,000 draw calls now. So some of the performance is actually coming from the draw calls. Some of it's coming from the character movement component. But the difference in performance will be coming from if it's using live retargeting or not. So that's 57 frames per second with 100 characters. And you can look at the millisecond difference yourself. I'm a bit zoned out, so I'm not exactly, I don't have picture memory right now, so let's see now. I know I pressed it. Okay, there it goes. Yeah, So this is getting about 52 frames per second with a 19 millisecond hit. 52, what was the other one? I don't even remember. I'm so zoned out right now. So 52, 19. I think the other one was a 17 millisecond hit. Also, recording has an impact on the performance too. So 52, and it looks like I'm going to be lenient and I'm going to say 58. So that's a 6 frame difference with 100 characters in the scene. But the millisecond hit on the game, it's about 1.5 to 2 millisecond difference. So as you can see, there is a performance hit to using live retargeting, but it's not like a game killer. It's not going to, like, in some situations, depending on the circumstances, depending on the build of your game, what your bottleneck is, it could be a deciding factor, or maybe it won't be. So it's going to be up to you and your game, how much extra time you're willing to put into like things, how much you do or don't want to mess with animation. If you don't want to mess with animation, then maybe live retargeting is the better option for you. If you're not afraid of animation, then I say go for the alternative. And I showed you a good alternative to using live retargeting. It just requires a little bit of extra work on your part. But even with the live retargeting setup, if you want fingers to look right, you're still going to have to modify the animations. And if you're going to modify the fingers for the animations, then I mean, why not just go ahead and do the rest? And I'll be honest, if I make a project of my own, I'm probably not going to use live retargeting. But for my project that I'm making public, I do need to have that as an option, because for a lot of people, they're not going to want to go through and have to modify those animations. So I hope that explains to you guys why I chose to use live retargeting in that project, and maybe some of you are a little bit less scared of live retargeting now. As you can see, these are some pretty extreme cases right here where live retargeting, the difference isn't really as big as what some people might think. So, I mean, if the difference in frame rate was like 20 or something like that, I'd be like, yeah, dude, don't use live retargeting. But it's less than 20 frames per second with 50 to 100 character or 25 to 100 characters in the scene. The difference is less than 10 in most cases. So earlier you seen it was 14 with 50, but I don't actually know why that's the case. When I was actually testing it before and I wasn't recording, the difference was only about 7 in that scene with 50 characters. So for some weird maybe it was because I changed the angle of the camera. I could actually change that back and run it again. Yeah, so let me not do it that way. Let me just do it this way. So before I go, I just want to actually do that real quick. So this is with 100 characters in the scene. This is with, oh no, let's do the 50. That's where the big difference was. That was where the big dip was. So we're going to do this one once again, but we're going to do it back how I had it before. Also, my previous tests, they were done from a fresh boot. This one is not, this wasn't done from a fresh boot. This video, I've had my computer running for a while now. And yeah, that can actually make a difference, believe it or not. All right. So the frame rate right here is about 94. I'm going to say 94 with a 10.5 millisecond hit. We'll say 10.6. So 10.6 and 94. So it was 10.6 and 94. Now it's 11 point, we'll just say 11.1 and 86. Yeah, so that's 10 frame difference. That's what I expected before. So you'll see the angle actually did make a difference. I'm not really sure exactly why, but it did make a difference having it down here like this. I'm not really sure because they're both in the same exact spot. But anyways, yeah, so the context of the situation is definitely going to have an effect on the difference in performance. But yeah, so I hope that helps you guys. I'll go ahead and come in here and I'll show you a few things as far as this was an Unreal Insight. I ran on it before. And this right here is mostly where the live retargeting stuff happens. So you have the skeletal mesh component. This is the complete parallel animation evaluation. And then inside of here, this is where the live retargeting is actually being offloaded onto the worker threads right here. So if we come in here and we look, you'll see that the live retargeting right here is only 4.2. Well, it's 4.4 microseconds. So there's 1,000 microseconds in a millisecond and 1,000 milliseconds in a second. So 1 microsecond is it's 100,000 microseconds in a second. So this would be 4 1/100,000ths of a second. And this is 2.9, 4, 3, 3.5. So I've tested this before, and it ranges and varies between like 2.2 and 6.5. So right here, this first one, for whatever reason, is always higher than the preceding ones after it. But yeah, so if we go and we look at this right here, you'll see that's not even 900 microseconds. So it's almost 1 millisecond hit on the game thread. So yeah, even if you do have things being offloaded onto the worker thread, they do still affect the game thread, because the game thread has to send them to the worker thread, and then it has to wait for them to return. So if you see this right here, this is where the game thread is waiting for it to return before it can continue. And you'll see this all across here. So anyway, that's basically the rundown on it, guys. It's ultimately going to be up to you. I'm not like a strong advocate of live retargeting. I just happen to use that in my project. If some of you guys are opposed to that, or if it just doesn't suit your game or needs, then you could go with an alternative method. It's going to be more work, and that's okay. If you're okay with doing more work, then I say go for it. I don't strongly advocate live retargeting, and there are more performant ways of going about handling this, and I've showed you some alternatives, but all in all, you're, at least for the males and the female metahumans, you're going to have at least one anim set for each of those to get both of their fingers looking right across all the males, and then to get the fingers looking right across all the females. And that's basically all I have to say on the subject, guys, and I will see you in the next video. Well, I'll actually close with this. Hand precision is only important when you're aiming a single-handed weapon, or if you're holding a two-handed weapon. Anytime you're holding a two-handed weapon, hand precision is always going to be important, regardless if you're aiming it or not. So that's all I have to say on the subject, and I'll see you in the next video.